All right, in section 8.5, we're going to do some more factoring, but this time the factoring is not taking out a monomial and just using the greatest common factor. We're going to actually unfoil. It's like I've said before. Every time you do something and learn how to do it in math, then you learn how to undo it. You learn to multiply, and then you divide. It does the exact opposite thing. This should look familiar. Go ahead and write it down. Example 1, you have x squared plus 11x plus 18. So you have a trinomial with x squared in the front, 11x plus 18. That was always the result when we did the distributive property with two binomials. So basically when we did the FOIL method. This was our result. Now we got to say, can we break it back down and put it back into its two parentheses? And what you're going to need to do is, let's make a little chart over here. We'll start it this way. You won't always have to do a chart, but this will help as we come up with some factors of 18. And by what we mean of factors of 18 is you need two numbers that when you multiply them, when you multiply these two numbers, they make 18. And probably the best way to do it is just make a list. Divide everything by 1. You get to count 1, unlike a factor tree. 1 times 18 is 18. 2 times 9 is 18. 3 times 6 is 18. And when you're trying to find your factors, I know some of you know this, but don't do trial and error. Don't. Some of you are just really good at your multiplication tables. Some not so much. Don't say like 3 times 7. I think that's 18. Oh, no, that's right. That's 21. Take 18 and divide it by 2. Then divide it by 3. Then divide it by 4. Then divide it by 5. And see which one works. If it's a whole number, write them down. 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, and then we're back to 6. Once you find those factors of 18, you have to do this first. Write this down on your notes so that you know you're doing this column first. Once you find those factors of 18, you have to make sure that they actually add up to make 11. So that's why we're doing these first. Why did I put this in this order if we need to do the back column first? Because I want it to match your trinomial up here. So 1 plus 18 is 19. 2 plus 9 is 11. And if you had a big long list, I would stop. I wouldn't even keep adding anymore because you just found out that your two factors are 2 and 9. Two numbers that multiply to make 18, but when you add them, they make 11. So what do we do with that? We know that this trinomial has to be broken down into two binomials. And because this is an x squared, we basically get x squared by taking x times x. X times x is x squared. And if you remember when we did the distributive property, first we took the x times x, then we took the x times this back number. And since both of these are positive and you're trying to find positive 18, you're going to put one of the factors here and the other factor here, plus 2 plus 9. You could have switched it around. If you wanted to put x plus 9 and x plus 2, you're going to get the same result. And that's it. That's your answer. It's not so bad. I mean, we're not going to get them much more complicated than this. In Algebra 2 you will, but in Algebra 1 we'll keep this as just an x squared or a y squared or whatever. We won't put a coefficient in the front of it. And it'll get a little bit tougher as we get bigger numbers, more factors, positive and negative in it. And right now you might be thinking like, where did that 11 go? How did this actually work? Well, this is your final answer. You don't want to do any more to it, but if you want to see like, how does that work? How is that unfoil? How is that factoring? If you distributed this out, you would do first, outside, inside, and last. You guys got pretty good at that. Like, this is relatively easy for you. And then you added like terms, and you got x squared plus 11x plus 18. So that's why we always need these two factors to add up to that middle term so that it matches. You can check your work if you want to. You don't have to every single time. Let's try the next one. X squared plus 3x plus 2. You make your chart over here and say it's got to add up. It has to have a sum of 3, but a factor of 2. Well, this one's nice. I like this one. You'll like this one because there is only one number, one pair of factors that goes into 2. 1 times 2. And they just so happen to add up to 3. So your two factors are 1 and 2. This is positive. This is positive. we break our x squared up into x times x, and our 2 into 2 times 1. And again, if you put x plus 2 and x plus 1, and then your girlfriend puts x plus 1 and x plus 2, you can't have a fight over who's right. You're both right. It doesn't matter. It can be x plus 1 or x plus 2. The order doesn't matter. How about this one? Okay, we changed the variable to a. Makes it a lot more exciting. Change things up a little bit. But you're still working with your two factors. Have to multiply to make 10. And they have to add to make 7. And some of you are already catching on to this. I know that your multiplication tables they come fast to you and you can see it. You know them in your brain. Then don't keep making a chart. The chart might be helpful if this number was like 24 and you had a whole bunch of pairs of factors, or if it was negative and you need more on your list. If you're all good without making the chart, break your a squared up into a and a. You know the only two factors of 10 are 1 or 2. 1 times 10 is 10. 2 times 5 is 10. So a plus 2, a plus 5. All right, let's change it up a little bit here. Now we've got a negative 6 in the middle. Go ahead and take the time to write this down. N squared minus 6n plus 8. Now we have a negative 6. So we have to make sure that when we add these two numbers, they equal a negative 6. But when you multiply them, they have to be a positive 8. Well, the only way that you can multiply two numbers and make them a positive 8 is a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. In this case, we know that we want our answer to be negative. So instead of using 1 and 8 as our two numbers, we are going to use negative 1 and negative 8. Because negative 1 times negative 8 is 8. But negative 1 plus a negative 8 gives us a negative 9. Not the right answer, but we know that we need the answer to be negative. So try the next one. Negative 2 times negative 6. A negative times a negative is a positive, but not times negative 6. One step ahead of myself. Negative 2 times negative 4. A negative times a negative is a positive, and a negative plus a negative is a negative. So we found our two factors, and we break it up the same. Our two binomials are n, and negative 2 and negative 4. Or negative 4 and negative 2. Now we're getting fancy. Throwing in some y's in there. But now our back number's negative. Every time it's like, oh yeah, I totally got the hang of this. Now it's, okay, you gotta be careful. Our back number is negative. We need factors, two numbers that multiply to make a negative. So you could use a positive 1 times a negative 15. Go ahead and pause this if you need to write that down and make your chart. You're going to need a chart this time. Because a positive 1 times a negative 15 makes negative 15. But so does a negative 1 and a positive 15. So now our list gets twice as long because you have to do one of each. You could use a positive 3 and a negative 5. Or you could switch that around and make it a negative 3 and a positive 5. Your list is twice as long if you don't want to think super hard or plan ahead. But over here you see that your sum has to be a positive 2. Well, whatever your sum is, when you add two negative numbers together, if you add two negative numbers together, 1 plus negative 15, you actually subtract the numbers and keep the higher sign. Or use a calculator. Negative 1 plus 15 is 14. So if you know ahead of time that you want your answer to come out positive, then when you do your list, don't do the factors that have a negative on the bigger number because you don't want it to be negative. You want it to be positive. You make sure that the bigger number is positive so that it matches over here. That's a rule you learned back in 7th grade and maybe 6th grade. The sooner you catch on to that, the less time it takes you to do every one of these example problems or your homework. All right, break it up. We've got a y and a y. And our two factors we found out over here are negative 1 and 15. So it's negative 3 and 5. So it's minus 3 and plus 5. Remember, we wanted it to come out to be 2. Negative 3 plus 5. And you might want to say, are you sure that that's going to work? Does that really work? You could FOIL. You could distribute, do it in your head or do it on paper. Y squared plus 5y minus 3y minus 15, because a negative times a positive. And 5y minus 3y is a positive 2y. So then you can check and see that it worked. And then you get a perfect score on all of your tests and quizzes because you checked your answers and you figured it out. Try this one by yourself. See what you get. Okay, this one, not so hard. The only factors of 3 are 3 and 1, but you know you want it to come out negative. So it's got to be a negative times a negative is a positive, but a negative plus a negative stays negative. It's x minus 3 and x minus 1. Same thing here. Take the time to write this down. You probably have to pause it. T squared minus 8t plus 12. Make a chart if you want to. Or just go ahead with, I know that that's negative and that's positive, so I need a negative times a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. A negative plus a negative is a negative. Check your factors of 12. 1 and 12? Nope. 2 and 6? Yep. You can do those in your head if your head has been groomed to do your multiplication tables. And some of you might be kicking yourself right now, like saying, I wish I would have done that better or learned it better. It's not too late. This one looks tougher, and for whatever reason, it always stumps people because they don't see a number in the middle. M squared plus M minus 20. You don't see a number in the middle, but you know it's there. Your back number is 20. You need to multiply to make negative 20, but you need to add two numbers that make a positive 1. If you're multiplying to make a negative 20 and you want a positive 1, you could use negative 1 and 20, but negative 1 plus 20 is 19. That's not going to work. Negative 2 and 10. Negative 2 times 10 works here, but negative 2 plus 10 adds up to 8. That doesn't work. 3 is not a factor. Let's try negative 4 times 5. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1. And there it is, negative 4 and 5. 2 hints on this one. Number 1, I remembered that if you want these to add up to be a positive number, make sure all the bigger numbers are positive. You don't have to do both. The bigger numbers are positive. Number 2, here's a hint. If you want that number to be 1 in the middle, then these have to be 1 apart, negative 4 and 5. Because when you subtract those, or add them up, you're going to get 1. So when you see a 1 in the middle, you're going to want two numbers that are next to each other. So I'm going to go with m minus 4 times m plus 5. And doing these in your head, it doesn't save any time if you have to think for too long. It's actually faster to make a chart if it takes you longer to think about your factors. Last one, negative 6 and 16. We're going to add two numbers that make negative 6, but when we multiply them, they have to make negative 16. There's our chart. We know that this is negative, and we know that this is negative, which means our bigger number has to be negative. So we're going to try 1 times 16. We're going to make the bigger number negative so that over here this column is negative. That didn't work. How about 2 and negative 8? 2 plus negative 8, oh, there we go, is negative 6. 2 plus negative 8. We're going to split this up into w plus 2 and w minus 8. And there it is. That's day 1. I took section 8.5 and split it up into 2 different days because the next lesson there's going to be a tweak. As usual, those of you that are used to me, it's like, oh, we learn all this and we get it, and then there's a tweak. Yep, I'm going to give you a tweak. So good luck. Figure out how to do these before we do on the next ones.